Hello, you're listening to The Sower, a podcast of the Ciceronian Society. In this episode, you'll hear Hillsdale historian Wilfred McClay, Dreaming of Ariadne, Thoughts on Cultural Restoration. This was the keynote address at our March 2026 conference in Omaha, Nebraska. Dr. McClay's talk is preceded by an introduction from Claire Aguda-Baker and is followed by a question and answer period. Here it is. Enjoy.
For those who haven't met yet, my name is Claire Aguda-Baker. I am newly installed at Boyce College as Assistant Professor of Politics and Humanities. I also have the great pleasure of serving on the Board of Directors of the Ciceronian Society. So I will confess to already abusing my privilege as member of the Board of Directors by asking our dear leader, Josh Bowman, if I could introduce our keynote speaker today, my friend, Bill McClay. Because we know that Ciceronians deeply cherish their Christian friendships. So, in reply to that request, our dear leader has generously granted me this honor, but in return, he gave me a few housekeeping reminders to share with y'all first. So, first up, if you are with the board of directors or the advisory board, please meet at the registration table after the keynote so we can organize ride sharing. Number 2, you are all invited to come back here tonight at 8 p.m. for another informal reception with a cash bar, and tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for morning prayer. Finally, if you want another drink ticket, as we talked about at lunch, either bring back a physical copy of the conference survey and return it to Josh, or show him that you've completed the online version. Don't use AI, and you will still get a ticket. All right, your feedback is very helpful and always taken seriously. No, but seriously, it is taking into consideration, so please do complete the survey, and you will be rewarded with drink tickets, which, as a newly installed Baptist professor, you can also use for non-alcoholic beverages. So, now with my duties, yay! Now with my duties officially discharged, dear leader, and in the spirit of the Ciceronian Society, let me attempt to entertain you for a couple of moments with some warm and jocular remarks about our keynote speaker, Dr. Wilfred McClay, who is a teacher, scholar, gentleman, and Christian. So I think that Dr. McClay is a once-in-a-generation historian and teacher. He holds the Victor Davis Hanson Chair in Classical History and Western Civilization at Hillsdale College, where he is regularly asked to speak to every kind of group that Hillsdale can't assemble. I am something of an informal student of his, often learning from him through lectures at conferences like this. There have been many, many pleasant hours well spent listening to his stories, comments, and analyses. Pro tip, give him some glasses of red wine and you will get even better stories for hospitality. My favorite conversations usually involve history. I've had 3 teachers of history who have profoundly shaped my scholarship, all of whom will be here this weekend. Shout outs to Dr. Jewell and Dr. Wilsey, who will be joining us as well. But Bill was the first. I have learned from him about history as a discipline, particularly the study of history as stemming from a love of people. From his introduction to Land of Hope, he writes, "The impulse to write history and organize our world around stories is intrinsic to us as human beings. We are, at our core, remembering and story-making creatures, and stories are one of the chief ways we find meaning in the flow of events. What we call history and literature are merely the refinement and intensification of that basic human impulse." End quote. An excellent advertisement for the study of letters if there ever was one. He was one of the first to articulate to me the breadth and depth of the true, good, and beautiful in the humanities. You will not then be surprised to learn of his own liberal education. He is a native of Maryland, therefore, and is a graduate of St. John's College in Annapolis, and received his PhD in history from Johns Hopkins University. He has only built upon his time as a Johnny studying great books by becoming one of, if not the, most widely and well-read person I know. Fun challenge for you here this evening. If you can find a topic to discuss with him that he does not have a book recommendation for, you get extra gold stars, because I don't know that that's possible. He is definitively the best wordsmith that I have ever met in person. Even his emails are imbued with a truly beautiful mastery of the English language, the kind of mastery well beyond even the furthest bounds of the AI horizon. Thankfully, and amid all his many commitments, he is an avid writer. One of his many articles and books, my favorite is Land of Hope, An Invitation to the Great American Story, which in my unbiased opinion, which I think is shared by many of you here, is the best American history textbook available. Notably for us Ciceronians, he co-edited a collection of essays on why place matters about 10 years ago, where he writes, quote, "What makes a place is not merely a loyalty to its past, but the vitality of its present and the lure of its future. Far from being static, a place must be a node of continuous human activity, political, economic, and cultural." Speaking of cultural, he is also known for channeling his mastery of the written word into a most charming display of the spoken word. I have never seen him in want of conversation partners or in want of impeccable manners, which are still great. Make etiquette great again. He is also quite humble. Our own James Patterson has called him the most aw-shucks professor you will ever meet. It will come as no surprise to you then to hear that he has quite the number of organizations who seek his involvement, particularly as a board member, or the number of honors or awards he has deservedly received. A small sampling includes winner of the Bradley Prize, selection as a member of the U.S. Commission on the Semi-Quincentennial, aka America 250, the National Council on the Humanities, and the Advisory Board for the National Endowment for the Humanities. As you have now heard, Bill has achieved more than most of us can hope to achieve by worldly standards. All of his achievements, though, have been undergirded by his deep Christian faith, and all of his work is suffused by this knowledge and love of the Lord. I think largely motivated by his Christian love, Bill is one of those people who has never met a stranger. I have seen him equally delighted in conversation with Uber drivers and scholars on any topic under the sun. He is also a true friend, willing to spare time, mentorship, and exchange treasure troves of great insights with, for example, lowly nonprofit employees who eagerly want to learn. Finally, and importantly, he is husband to his lovely wife, Julie, and father to Mark and Barbara. In summary, I am so thankful for his example. I can only hope to be half of the teacher and a quarter of the scholar that he is. To me, he is a true exemplar of a teacher, scholar, gentleman, and Christian. He is one of those luminaries who guides us through the great conversation, especially about tradition, place, and things divine, such as his lecture for us here today, Dreaming of Ariadne, Thoughts on Cultural Restoration. Please join me in welcoming our keynote, Dr. Wilfred McClay.
Oh, shucks, that was so nice of you. I'm glad you got in Julie, because my wife, because I really would be nothing without her. And I think there are men in this audience who can say the same of their own spouses. So thank you for all of that. I'm delighted to be here, and it's I'm greatly honored by your invitation to speak to you. Up to now, I've been watching the Ciceronian Society from a distance, not a cautious distance, but definitely on the sidelines, getting reports from Claire, and I'm going to have to get used to calling her Claire Baker. Everybody, Claire Baker, or Claire Aguda-Baker. Yeah. Sounds a lot like rutabaga, so you may want to get rid of that. Just a helpful suggestion, you know. So I've tried to attend meetings in the past, and my schedule has gotten in the way, but not this time. And I'm so glad, so grateful for that fact. It's a delight to me. It's kind of an astonishment to me, this group. I didn't expect it to be so big, and I didn't expect it to be so lively, and I didn't expect that it would drive me to using a word I'd vowed never to use, that is vibe. There is a vibe here. And I think Claire must have apprised me of this in some way, but maybe I just wasn't listening. Or I figured she was so excited about getting married that, everything else was in the backseat. But anyway, I'm just astonished and delighted to find such an assemblage of scholars, writers, thinkers, and in the best sense of the word, activists, who are both humble Christians and proud traditionalists in one or another sense of that many-splendored term. You all are willing to go against the grain of the times. Often, as was discussed in the lunchtime session that I attended, in ways that are perilous, if that's not too strong a word, to your career prospects and even your standard of living. But you're willing to do that to follow your star and your soul. And this is an inspiring sight to me. It almost brings me to tears. I see the growth of this organization, which has been very rapid, as an augury of better things to come. For too long, we've concentrated on everything but the condition of our souls. And now we seem all too ready to turn the work of being human, even of educating our young, over to the ever more fabulous machines that we have devised, with results that no one can possibly predict, but that it is not unreasonable to fear. It's all quite astonishing. It is as if no one remembers the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Now, you remember the story, right? Don't disabuse me of that. But I'll repeat it anyway. An elderly sorcerer steps away from his workshop, leaving his apprentice with boring chores to perform. Sort of a graduate student assistant. When the apprentice gets tired of lugging around pails of water, he enchants a broom to do the work for him, using incantational magic in which he's not yet fully versed. The broom promptly goes to work with its assigned task, with unusually strong, even frenzied energy. The floor is soon awash with water sloshed onto the floor by the awkward broom. And the apprentice realizes he cannot stop the broom because he doesn't know the magic required to undo the spell that he has cast or what he has started. In desperation, the apprentice splits the broom in two with an axe, but each of the split pieces becomes a whole new broom that takes up a pail and continues fetching water, now twice as fast, with twice the number of troops. At this frantic pace, it's not long before the entire room is flooded. At just the moment when all seems to be lost, the old sorcerer returns and quickly breaks the spell. And the poem ends with the old sorcerer making a somber warning that only a master is equipped to invoke powerful spirits. It's a haunting little thriller of a poem that began life as a ballad by Goethe. A lot of people don't realize that. In 1797, there were some forerunners in the German folk literary tradition. We won't quibble about that. We're a sort of great books crowd, right? So Goethe gets it. Then a century later, it was dramatized in the music of the French composer Paul Dukas. It is correct to pronounce the S, by the way. I checked. Which in turn was made world famous by a depiction of the story in the classic 1940 Walt Disney animated film Fantasia, which I would bet that many of you have seen. Even Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had to get in on this act. There's a line in the Communist Manifesto which compares calamities of bourgeois society to, quote, the sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the netherworld, whom he has called up by his spells, close quote. Of course, if you were listening closely, you would say, well, that's a misinterpretation of the story. But what did you expect? It's Karl Marx. It's not the sorcerer, it's the apprentice that is the one that can't control things. But again, what do you expect? And besides, the fact of Marx's misreading, or it might have been Engels, only underscores my point that this tale of the sorcerer's apprentice had already penetrated far and wide in his day and has to be thought of as one of the cautionary narratives woven into the cultural fabric of the modern West. These narratives include stories like the story of Icarus's plunge to death after flying too close to the sun, or the ill-fated construction of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, just to name a few, and there are a lot more. Or I should correct myself, it has been one of those elements of that narrative tradition up to now. I'm not as confident today as I might have been even 20 years ago that the treasury of such narratives is available to everyone in an educated American audience. I'm not so sure everyone would understand these allusions. I'm not sure they're still part of our common culture, our heritage. So what I've done here is to provide us an example of one of the principal ways that a civilization works when it's working. It works by using literary devices like this one called allusion. That's allusion. The practice of placing known things into conversation with one another by juxtaposition. Stories, tales, literary figures, images, all sorts of data drawn from tradition and from different aspects of life, exalted and everyday alike. This device, allusion, gains an effectiveness by the number of things it can draw upon. Of course, the number of things cannot be completely infinite, literally, but the greater the number, the greater degree to which they're shared, the richer the insight that civilization can bring to bear. Something else, when we make an allusion, we often refer to something, person, object, place, without mentioning it by name, and generally without explaining how it relates to the given context. That means that the reader or audience or auditor must understand the connection without the connection being explicitly made for them. They must figure it out for themselves, to speak in plainer English. I have to hold myself back. I go academic. I'm about to do it again. A good joke doesn't need to be explained. And if it is explained, it's not funny anymore. It's not funny if you have to explain a joke. It's a catastrophe. Although Johnny Carson, for those of you who remember Johnny Carson, somehow managed to make his failed jokes into a rich source of humor. But he was one of a kind. A high capacity for allusion in a culture is a mark of high cultural literacy, a rich shared world of discourses, perfect for conversation and for slang. It's also a great ground for making jokes, since much humor relies on the unstated and perhaps unspeakable, or not speakable in polite company, shared knowledge. I can give you some examples of that if you want later. That's some that I just experienced a couple of days ago, to my amazement. None of this should be a surprise, because the Latin root of allusion goes back to ludere, to play. Homo ludens, Johann Huizinger's theory of the human distinctives that we are, that play is one of the essentials, not work, but play. A high capacity for play is certainly a sign of civilizational refinement and coherence. As the literary scholar Ted Cohen put it, and fasten your straps, I did say literary scholar, so you know. Recognizing the point of allusion's condensed riddle also reinforces cultural solidarity between the maker of the allusion and the hearer. Their shared familiarity with allusion bonds them. That's a kind of unplayful way of saying it, but he's right. He's dead right. A joke comes off very differently if the joke teller has to explain the joke. There's no reinforcement of cultural solidarity. I think we sort of know what that means in such a moment. It's actually quite the opposite, and can be a very different sense of humor, a different source of humor. When you have somebody using the slang of, I think of the movie Rush Hour, it's full of these kind of gags where, the Chinese guy is trying to talk Black American English and it gets him into trouble because he doesn't really know what he's saying. He lacks the cultural solidarity, to use that pretentious phrase. So I hope I've made my point that a culture's ready capacity for allusion is a good sign of its health, and the diminishment of that capacity is a sign of the opposite, the loss of common culture, and even, as we see on late night television today, the loss of humor. So now, establishing this, we can push on to Ariadne. I know you've all when am I going to get Ariadne? Okay, she's here. Ariadne, the subject of my address, this ostensible subject of my address. And in doing that, we make another allusion, drawing on the ancient Greek mythological elements in our very rich Western tradition. I will confess to you that I've had Ariadne on my mind for a long time, but not in a romantic way, not at all. Trust me on this. I've been happily married for almost 43 years to a real human being. And the last thing I would ever do is give that up for a daughter of King Minos, who has to be one of the worst fathers-in-law in all history. And the family, I won't even go there. Before I get too far into this elusive double entendre business, let me steer us toward the central story about Ariadne and why I've been thinking about her. As I've said, she was the daughter of King Minos of Crete, and Minos himself was the son of Zeus and Europa, which is a pretty fancy lineage. Minos had lost his beloved son and blamed the Greeks for it. We won't go into the details about that. A lot of things we're going to pass over. He chose to punish them for this by requiring them to sacrifice 7 young men and 7 maidens regularly. It varies every 7 years, every 9 years, every year, how these myths are. We'll go with the every 7 years. Bringing them to Crete to be fed, literally, to this horrible beast, half bull and half man, called the Minotaur. Fun fact, the Minotaur was the half brother of Ariadne. I'm not going to get into how this happened. I'll only say it would have been a good episode for Law and Order SVU. The Minotaur was confined to a labyrinth which had been designed by the great architect Daedalus. It was a maze whose pathways were so intricate and subtle and elaborate that he, the Minotaur, could not escape. And those who went in were not able to escape the ministries of the Minotaur. I know you're all thinking of a Roach Motel, but I'm not going to allude to that. So one year, the sacrificial party sent to the Isle of Crete for this ritual, this punitive ritual, included Theseus, the handsome, heroic, Hollywood guy, son of the Greek king, who volunteered in order to have the opportunity to kill the Minotaur and bring to an end this humiliating punishment that had been imposed on them by Minos. When he arrived at Crete, Ariadne instantly fell in love with him, madly in love with him, and gave him a sword and a ball of thread to put to use in his encounter with the Minotaur. With the sword, Theseus killed the Minotaur, and then with the thread, following the advice of Ariadne, he was able to find his way back out of the labyrinth after having had the presence of mind to use the thread to mark his way in. Well, we could go on. The story doesn't end there, but in case you're interested, just a few details. Ariadne, having defied her father for love, elopes with Theseus, who dumps her. They do not live happily ever after. And then she goes on to marry Dionysus, the Mick Jagger of the Olympian world. And that doesn't end well either. These Greek family dramas never end well. But let's go back to Ariadne and her thread. That's the important part. It's not Ariadne herself, but the symbolism of the thread that interests me so much and occupies my dreams. Her thread, and indeed the whole story, speaks powerfully to our condition. Trapped as we are in a cultural labyrinth of hopeless nihilism and now self-negating post-humanism, desperately in need of an intellectual and spiritual victory over dark falsehoods, a slaying of the Minotaur of postmodernity, and then finding our way back to where we began, perhaps, as T.S. Eliot said, in order to know the place for the first time. You see, I'm littering our path with more and more allusions as to the four quartets in the poem Little Gidding. And there will be more to come before I step down and shut up. I promise. Every allusion that I make has a piece of the answer to our dilemma, the renewal and restoration of our culture. We move forward when we move backward. Theseus was embarked on a quest, and so are we. This notion of quest or pilgrimage as the proper organization of a human life was one of the great themes of Walker Percy's fiction. How wonderful that Peter Lawler's name has come up. It's said that God, the coincidences are God's puns. So I don't know whether God is making a pun here, but I did this quite independent of that. So Walker, if you don't know it, Percy's often talked about this. And his great novel, The Moviegoer, which Peter wrote about, and was in some respects a parable about the outsourcing of human life to machines and image-generating machines. He began the book, the epigraph of the book, is a quotation from Kierkegaard, another Southern writer. And I quote, "The specific character of despair is precisely this. It is unaware of being despair." The book, which is a charming read if you haven't read it, takes aim at the deadly character of quiet, comfortable complacency, of life lived sunk in everydayness. Some of you Heideggerians will catch the illusion of everydayness, which is a Heideggerian term. This life of a don't ask, don't tell relationship with the abyss that we live close to. And that's the mood that hangs over the entire novel. Although it is charming, as I said, it's a mood that it cautions us against. And indulge me for a minute. I can't pass over this without mentioning my late friend Ted McAllister, which I think many of you in this room knew from Pepperdine. And Ted was a very, very close friend. He died a couple of years ago of cancer. And he had a private email address that he made, I think he used for just a few people. And the email address was, "I'm questing." He didn't use it with his colleagues at the university, only used it with the people who are aware of him being a questing person in the Walker Percy sense of the term. Sorry. So, just that side mention. Killing the Minotaur, I think, is part of our quest. But it probably will be the less difficult part of our quest, I believe, because the arguments for post-humanity are weak and self-subverting. The greater challenge will be to find our way back out of the labyrinth, using Ariadne's thread to guide our feet. That's something worth dreaming about. It's strange to think of it this way, but the struggle to recover what was worthy in the past is the heart of the quest facing us. And it is a quest. It's not just a preoccupation. Ariadne's thread represents that long strand of illusions and cultural memory that make up our heritage, a great and sustaining story whose many elements have been obscured and gradually squandered over many centuries, the pace increasing just like the Sorcerer's Apprentice pace increases. But it's not too late for us to recover. I think all of us believe that. That sustained act of recovery is why we're here today. And in fact, the act of recovery is part of the story. It's a story of redemption. The thread symbolizes the continuity of that heritage that we are trying to reappropriate, to make our own again. The linkage of past, present, and future, of the connection of the whole story, including our connection to it. It is both the means and the end of our escape from the Minotaur's clutches and from the labyrinth. So where to begin? I think we've already begun just by gathering here. But we have to face up to the depth of the problem, which is far more than a matter of bad schooling and an unhealthy popular culture, important as those factors are. The problem goes much deeper. The bullying and censorious combination of Jacobinism, Maoism, and secular Puritanism that's taken possession of our intellectual classes, those who occupy the commanding heights of our culture, is not a new thing. It did not arise suddenly out of nowhere. It's been coming for a long time. The agenda of late modernity has narrowed its sights and become a steady and sustained assault on the claims of memory, grounded in the conviction that the past has nothing to teach the present. And whenever our sense of the past fails to be harmonious with the desiderata of the present moment, it must undergo a thoroughgoing erasure and reconstruction. My own discipline of history is often, alas, a part of the problem. Claire's gotten an earful about that over the years. Some of the most eminent historians of our time, like the late French historian Pierre Nora, have declared that history is the enemy of memory. And should be. Or the British historian J.H. Plum, who said that true history is destructive, and its role is to cleanse the story of mankind from those deceiving visions of a purposeful past. Wow. To cleanse the story of mankind from those deceiving visions of a purposeful past. How can we defend historical memory against such naked, nihilistic assault? Living as we do in an era that fancies itself the age of ultimate truth, including moral truth, we are now obliged to take command of the past as well as the present, if we're to forge a future of pure justice and pure equity. We can't allow ourselves to be made impure by the presence of bad examples in our world. They must be removed from our sight. And all the statues erected to any and all imperfect human beings, and all imperfect heroes of the past, must come down immediately, which probably means that all of them will have to come down eventually. The imperious quality of these demands bespeaks a commitment to the uncontested primacy of the will of those now living, and their sovereign right to impose whatever standards they want on the people and conditions and memories of the past, with absolutely no fellow feeling or regard for the extenuating circumstances that we call context. Instead, the watchword is the brutal saying of William Blake, "Drive your cart and your plow over the bones of the dead." Edmund Burke's notion that society should be understood as a contract between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born has proven to be no match for the hard wheels of Blake's cart. And it was our own Thomas Jefferson who proclaimed repeatedly that the earth belongs to the living. I think instead we should consider Chesterton's description of tradition as the democracy of the dead, the disposition of those who, quote, refuse to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. I like that. Nor should we be surprised that the assault extends to the living and to what were once regarded as fixities of our natural endowment, including formerly unassailable facts relating to sex and marriage and maternity. All that now has to give way to the imperial will, which has the right to alter and redefine anything it likes in the name of autonomy and agency, and impose laws that command the rest of us to speak of these things in the prescribed manner, with no quarter given to memory, custom, momentary indiscretion, or for that matter, reality. The notion that tradition may be an enemy of human potential is especially strong in American culture and has been for most of American history. Think, for example, of the works of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who began his 1863 book, Nature, with the following cry. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face, we through their eyes. Why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should not we have a poetry and philosophy of insight and not of tradition? And a religion by revelation to us and not the history of theirs. The sun shines today. There's flax and wood in the fields. Wool and flax in the fields. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. Now, how American is that? America first. Right now first. When Emerson later divided America's intellectual history between the party of memory and the party of hope, there was little doubt which he believed was to be preferred. And yet, for Christians, all the modern world's accumulated suspicion of tradition and memory has to yield and bow its knee before Jesus' singular command, which accompanies his establishment of the ritual of the Eucharist. Do this in remembrance of me. That's the only regular ritual act that Jesus instituted, and it's central to Christian practice, albeit with many variants in many different denominations. Jesus' body given, his blood shed, his suffering, his death, his resurrection, the prospect of his return, all of these things more are to be remembered. Something very similar happens with the Passover Seder, which remembers the story of the Exodus and connects that story to the lives of Jews in the present day. These remembrances are made contemporary, meaning there's something from the distant past which is being made available, made fully palpable in the present moment, and then passed on to the next generation. The Seder itself, as you may know, is based on the biblical verse in Exodus commanding Jews to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And I quote, "You shall tell your child on that day," April 1st this year, no fooling. "You shall tell your child on that day, saying, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. It's a story of grateful liberation, a story that defines a people. It's a very profound application of tradition, providing a people with a still point at the center of things, a self-defining ritual that does not change, but requires remembrance. And also, it's an act of appropriation, of making the thing remembered one's own. The great Lutheran and then Orthodox theologian Jaroslav Pelikan concludes his marvelous book, The Vindication of Tradition, with words taken from Goethe's Faust. And I quote, "What you have as heritage, take now as task, for thus you will make it your own." I'll repeat that. "What you have as heritage, take now as task, for thus you will make it your own." His chief point here is that the acknowledgement of a tradition or heritage does not absolve us of the need to think for ourselves and build things of our own. Far from it. It is the means by which we're able to grasp hold of the things of our own and appropriate them freshly, make them our own. It does not stifle innovation. Instead, it spurs innovation because it helps us to recognize the work that we are meant to do. In this view, our heritage is our task, something I think everybody in this room understands. We cannot undertake the task. We cannot know what the task is without the benefit of the heritage, its discourse, its attempts to articulate the problems of human existence. And it is by accomplishing that task that we can come into the full possession of that heritage, thereby perpetuating the heritage, the tradition, as something living rather than something moribund, and thereby making it possible for us to have a free and full relationship with the heritage, like that of children who have grown up and learned what it means to love their parents as fellow adults. It does happen. And in turn, what survives through us is the tradition carried forward as something living. So, how are we to do that? What does that look like? I really like some of the very practice-oriented things that I've heard since I've been here. So let me try to come close to them, if not to equal them. And I want to use an example of the kind of relationship with tradition of which I'm speaking. It's a poem by the American poet Dana Gioia. It's called Planting a Sequoia, and describes the enactment of a tradition with a very interesting twist and adaptation that makes the tradition live and makes it even more vital. It's possible that one or more of you have actually heard me read this poem before, because I do it every chance I get. I think it's a marvelous, maybe even great poem. And it's short, so do you wonder we won't fall asleep? I think, seriously, I think it's a poem that deserves to endure, but you can be the judge. So, Planting a Sequoia. But first, a little bit of background. Dana Gioia, some of you may know his name. He would certainly be a friend of this enterprise. He is, as the name might suggest, partly of Italian, specifically Sicilian descent. And he relates in the poem a Sicilian custom. It's actually not just in Sicily. The other places this is done. But that particular way of doing it that he learned with Sicilian. And he, following the practice of his own father, of planting an olive or fig tree upon the birth of a first son, along with a piece of the discarded umbilical cord. The poem depicts a reenactment of that tradition, but with a difference. Gioia's own first son had died tragically of sudden infant death syndrome. So it was going to be a different kind of planting altogether. So here is planting a sequoia. All afternoon, my brothers and I have worked in the orchard, digging this hole, laying you into it, carefully packing the soil. Rain blackened the horizon, but cold winds kept it over the Pacific, and the sky above us stayed a dull gray, the dull gray of an old year coming to an end. In Sicily, a father plants a tree to celebrate his first son's birth, an olive or a fig tree, a sign that the earth has one more life to bear. I would have done the same, proudly laying new stock into my father's orchard, a green sapling rising among the twisted apple boughs, a promise of new fruit in other autumns. But today, we kneel in the cold, planting you, our native giant, defying the practical custom of our fathers, wrapping in your roots a lock of hair, a piece of an infant's birth cord, all that remains above earth of a firstborn son, a few stray atoms brought back to the elements. We will give you what we can, our labor and our soil, water drawn from the earth when the skies fail, nights scented with the ocean fog, days softened by the circuit of bees. We plant you in the corner of the grove, bathed in western light, a slender shoot against the sunset. And when our family is no more, all of his unborn brothers dead, every niece and nephew scattered, the house torn down, his mother's beauty ashes in the air, I want you to stand among strangers, all young and ephemeral to you, silently keeping the secret of your birth. There are many things to say about this remarkable poem, and I'm going to only offer a single observation. What Gioia has done here, both in the poem itself and in the act that the poem describes, is a luminous, haunting lesson in both the permanence and the adaptability of tradition. He has kept faith with his heritage by alluding to it, but he also has made it his own. And instead of planting a practical tree that would be productive within the range of his lifetime, he chose to plant a thin slip of a mighty tree, a tree whose lifetime will be measured in millennia and whose full majesty and mature fruitfulness will never be seen by anyone now alive or in any context that we now can imagine. The profound significance that Gioia attributes to the symbol of the sequoia is not unique to him. It seems to affect all who come into the presence of these mighty trees. Let me give you one more example. The Southwestern American writer Mary Austin, writing in 1927. In some ways, this is almost as beautiful as Gioia. The trees have each its own voice, a degree of flexibility or length of needles upon which the wind harps to produce its characteristic note. The traveler in the dark of mountain nights knows his way among them as by the street cries of his own city. But there is one tree that's voiceless. It speaks, no doubt, but it speaks only to the austere mountain heads, to the mindful wind and the watching stars. It speaks as men speak to one another and are not heard by the little ants crawling over their boots. This is the big tree, the sequoia. In something less than a score of forest patches, the sequoia abides out of some possible pre-glacial period, out of some past of which nothing is left to us but the fading memory of the giants in those days. The age, this is continuing Mary Austin, the age of individual big trees can be computed in terms of human history. There are evidences written into the rings of these that they endured the drought which made the famine in the days of Ahab the king, against which Elijah prayed. These are growing trees whose seeds are fertile. It is a thrilling thought, isn't it? That these trees are not only contemporary with us, but might also have been contemporary with the men and women of biblical times. Equally alive in both cases, a living link between both times. So perhaps Gioia's planting of a sequoia is not such an audacious act after all. It's an act of humble connection. And I cannot pass up noting that in adapting one tradition, the poet's also clearly recalling and alluding to another, explicitly biblical one, expressed in the soaring words of the prophet Isaiah. Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and to take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the works of their hands. They will not toil in vain or bear children doomed to misfortune. For they will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. It's Isaiah 65. This messianic vision promises us the world as restored to what it was created to be, in which each is able to live in safety under his own vine and fig tree with the full complement of offspring. But the poet lives in a broken world, which has fallen bitterly short of that promise. And so he must pay his respects obliquely. For him, that means planting a different kind of tree, a silent tree, whose value is not in the fruit it bears or the shade it provides, but in the austere distance it marks between the promise and the poet's circumstances, here and now, grieving a dead son, digging in the earth. He stands between the two, remembering the messianic hope, but not forgetting the former things. And in so doing, he creates something new out of the unexpected materials that have become his heritage, and he has made them his own. And by making the tradition his own, he's given it life and ensured its perpetuation and growth. Such is what we must do today and in each generation. The past itself is not static, but grows and develops in our hands. The party of memory is the party of hope. They are one and the same. So go forth, be hopeful, and plant sequoias if you can. Thank you all. Thank you.
It's on. All right. Well, thank you. We do have some time for some questions. You want some to ask him about just about anything. I didn't tell him that, but personal questions, probing personal questions, political ones that wouldn't, I'm just kidding.
I wouldn't try sequoias in Nebraska myself. But you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
I should have, in introducing the poem, I should have mentioned the obvious, which is Dana lives in California on the coast. So that circuit of bees and all of that, that's a very, very West Coast. The whole thing is very West Coast, but it's not tied to that.
Thank you, Dr. McClay. A question. Most of us work with young people who have not been taught, who do not have the ability to allude because they don't know what they would be alluding to. How do we draw them in when often we get them at such an age where they're not K through 12 anymore? They're college graduates and such.
I know. You can't exactly do what Dorothy Sayers called the Paul Parrott stage with college students. No, that's a very tough question. And all we can do is try our best to. I think one thing that I find, and of course I teach mainly American history, so I can't do this very much. But when I get to do it, and I have been able to do it in a couple of the jobs I've had, where I've had sort of great books courses and things, is to show how. And I don't use the word allusion a lot. It just came to my mind when I wanted to write about this. That the connections between things and the way in which, for example, the way that with an epic poetry, the Odysseus theme, how that evolves from Homer to James Joyce, and even what's his name, Derek Walcott, Omeros, which I have taught to great effect. I had a wonderful course at Oklahoma where I was able to do this. I taught at the University of Oklahoma for 8 years, and we had a course. I'm going to go on about this because I think this is really something everybody can maybe benefit from. And I had seen that W.H. Auden, the poet, who had taught at the University of Michigan, just down the road from me now, in 1941, he taught a course called, I can't remember. It had this very...
The fate of humanity, or
the fate, something like that, human destiny, whatever, in the European novel. Yeah. And it was this totally gobsmacking kind of long thing with, half of the great books, a very curious selection of them, but, 9 operas, and a few secondary sources, and it was a 1 semester course. And, this appeared on the internet. His Edward Mendelsohn, Auden's biographer, discovered it, and then Alan Jacobs, at Baylor, put it up on the internet, and thus I discovered it. And I thought, I want to do that. You know, I'm just crazy enough. I want to try to do something like that. So, and I went around and talked to people I liked at Oklahoma I thought I could work with. And I got 2 other people to team teach the course with me, one of whom was the provost of the university. And it was a fabulous, fabulous course. And we did the Odysseus sequence. You had to take 2 semesters, and we had kids reading in quantities that I can't quite believe even at the time that they did, but they did. They did the work. The provost advertised the course as the hardest course you'll ever take. And I said, why are you doing this? It's going to, he knew better than me. And he would tell students, I heard him do it, I don't think you're good enough for this course. I don't think you can hack it. So we were over-enrolled. And we were, every semester that I was there, we taught the course. And unfortunately, it's not being taught now. I think it's because I'm not there. I was the moving force behind it. So, but it was a great way of showing how, intellectual history, to use that off-putting term, is a matter of conversation between and among books and authors and stories. And that, again, to use another term I don't like, intertextuality, but that's fairly precise, is part of what a civilization is. It's not just reading a book in isolation. It's reading books that are in some way in dialogue with one another. Even if they don't know they're in dialogue with one another, they may be talking about the same thing. So I think I always think that conversation, I think the recovery of conversation is one of the big tasks of education ahead. And AI will not be any help with this. You can tell I'm not a big fan of AI. Conversation, the ability to respond to other people, to respond to questions. The oral dimension, that's something we are going to have to do more with orality in our teaching. But, and less writing papers and grading papers. But, papers that AI can write probably better than our students can write. But, I think that, I hope I'm not straying too far from your question, but I think that's, they get them in here's an analogy. In history, a lot of times, and I found this in graduate school, a topic doesn't really become interesting until you are exposed to debates about it. So, was Andrew Jackson just a lunatic? Or did he have reasonable objections to the Bank of the United States? I won't talk about anything else he did with the Bank of the United States. That's the issue. Who can get interested in the Bank of the United States? Well, you can get interested if you dig into the contemporary debates and the debates historians have had since. Any number of things. The Mexican War. Did the Mexican War make the Civil War inevitable? I'm in the school of yes on that, by the way. But others see, I'm dispositionally, I'm a contingency guy. I think nothing is inevitable. But I think the Mexican War made it pretty much inevitable. Anyway, once you get into those debates, then all of a sudden the details become interesting. Mastery of the details becomes, so you put, you approach these texts into them as participants in the civilizational dialogue, the civilizational discourse. Do not use terms like civilizational discourse. Then they'll just, okay, you went to college, I know it, but have that in your mind. And of course it's just as true that digging deeply into a particular text, is important. I've had a number of experiences lately with students, not just at Hillsdale, but elsewhere, who said, what I really value is the time that Professor X spent 2 days reading line by line through the Declaration of Independence and unpacking it, questioning it, having arguments about it, and what did Jefferson really mean here? In some cases, introducing the earlier drafts, which I think tends to be a distraction, but, some people do it well. But that's valuable too. It doesn't give you any sense of, frame of reference. How is the Declaration, like similar documents? How is it like the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen? Superficially, it's very similar. And Jefferson had a role in advising Lafayette in the drafting of it, but there's all sorts of Rousseau in there that is not in the Declaration of Independence, and that makes a big difference. So, you could do that, but I think your specific question, how to understand that allusiveness is a way of broadening your discourse and broadening your insight. Don't be above, I made a reference to Law and Order SVU in my talk. Don't be above doing things like that, where obviously that's for baby boomers, but you don't have baby boomers in your classes, but something of the television I don't watch anymore. Something that that they're acquainted with. There are a limited number of grand themes in the literary tradition. You can get hold of, something like this dates me already, but say The Matrix, which is pure Plato. I don't know whether the brothers or sisters or the guys who made the movie, I don't know what they are now. But they were clearly drawing on that notion that we can be trapped within a whole discursive universe that cuts us off from the real world. So they will, that can be a way into Plato. What I don't like, and I have a very good friend who I won't name, because at least one person in the audience knows him, who told me that wouldn't it be great if we could use all the things we know about Jefferson and create an AI Jefferson that students could talk to and ask him questions about. And I just cringed. I was horrified. It was like the Night of the Living Dead. He'd been possessed. So you see, there's a wider range of references that we can draw upon. And they may not know what Night of the Living Dead is, but there's probably something. And then they get the idea of what allusiveness is all about, that an example from someplace else can illuminate and expand your understanding of a text or a film or whatever. I hope I answered your question.
Well, that was a question. Okay. Other questions?
So one thing that I have noticed since I've left the academy, I'm now a practicing attorney. One thing that I've noticed with juries and doing jury selection and that kind of thing is orality is very hard for us as a society. It's hard to get a group of people to respond to an oral argument in kind of an emotional way. Initially, I thought maybe this was, if I'm making an argument in front of a jury in a criminal trial, that maybe they just didn't believe in the presumption of innocence, for example, as a value. But I think the more I've thought about it, I think they just don't really understand kind of abstract ideas like that. And that goes across the gamut for a lot of other political concepts and whatnot. So, with these illusions and with these other things, how do we get that back? What do we do to engage people that seem to have lost the ability to not just get illusions, but ideas almost?
Well, having never been a practicing attorney or even an experimenting attorney, I don't know how much weight my answer will, but I will make an answer, which is I really believe almost everybody I know who has ever served on a jury, and I've been I've gone through the voir dire process, and for some reason or another I never make it onto the jury, but has benefited. Every person I know has benefited enormously in a sense of sobriety. I don't know what else to call it, about decision making, because they're instructed in a way that they really have to pay attention and listen in what the law is, what the evidence that they can consider, what evidence they can't consider, and they have to. Again, it's all going to depend on what kind of 12 angry people you're going to have there, but I think everybody I know who's gone through it, including some very ignorant people, have been deepened by the experience of jury duty. Now, whether they've done justice, I can't judge. That's entirely different. But we are talking about the jurors here, and what are they able to? Do they have the cognitive gifts that people operating under the English common law, 300 years ago or more had? And I think they do. I think that people, by and large, that people respond well. That's one reason I have a well-hidden confidence in the rising generation, because I think when the challenges are there, they will respond to them unbelievably well. Because that's what always happens, that people don't, it's hard to simulate the kind of challenge that, especially in males, brings out what's best and what's heroic in them. They don't even know, it's like not knowing about despair. They don't even know that they want to be heroes, but that is what most of them want. These scraggly, pimply guys staggering around. There's a guy I see at my grocery store all the time. He's stoned all the time and just staggering around. And I know that there's something in him that circumstances do not draw out. But if Ulysses S. Grant, a drunk, working for his father's leather goods factory in Galena, Illinois at the outbreak of the Civil War, can become one of the greatest generals in human history. And I'm not even getting into St. Paul, but if that transformation can occur, a lot of things can occur. But back to juries. I think juries teach, Tocqueville's very good on this, about what juries, the qualities of character that juries bring out and allow people to exercise, perhaps for the first time in their lives. And, I have to say too, I have several friends who are judges at various levels. They all say the same thing. I said I would prefer a jury trial to a bench trial anytime, and in terms of justice. So that's my experience, for what it's worth, which may be nothing.
Thank you. I'm curious if we're trying to recover a kind of illusion that would tether us to a deep truth. What happens when our connectivity to the past is bound up in legend, but factual history might get in the way of that, right? If the fact becomes legend, do we print the legend, or how do we deal with literal or historical inconsistencies with our memory?
You're making an illusion with that question, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, everyone know that movie. And, I'm not going to rehearse it, but, that question is almost too elaborate for me. Can I ask a favor of you? There's a book sitting there by my briefcase. Could you hand that book to me? That might be my way of answering. Okay.
I was going to say, he's going to hit you with it.
I brought this. This is actually a 2-volume book, and I had the intention of including it in my talk, but then I came to the realization that anything I did would seem like advertising. So I can do it at the end, but this is a book called The Golden Thread. Can I ask a show of hands, how many people have you heard about The Golden Thread? A lot of you. Okay, well, you don't need weights anymore. You could just use this for your bench press. It's an amazing achievement. There are 2 volumes of this, and I had a role in this, although I'm not one of the authors. But I wrote a textbook called Land of Hope, which is about it's an American history text. It was very successful, and the publisher, which is Encounter Books, came up with the idea of having a Western Civ version of that, and they hired Alan Gelso and Jim Hankins, who has just received the Bradley Prize, by the way, for this, and to write the 2 volumes. And Jim did the first volume, this one, the really thick one, and Alan did the less thick second volume, which goes up to the present. The Renaissance is sort of the dividing line. And the title is, which I didn't come up with, but the title is an allusion to what I've been talking about today, Ariadne's thread. And this book is the thread. It's an attempt to sort of codify the contents of that thread in a way that will stand for a long time, that you will not find in even the best comparable textbooks. Even the Kagan-Turner one is pretty good, Western Heritage, but it's not anything like this. And it's a cornucopia of art. I mean, you open it up and you feel like you're in a kind of fun house of cultural joy. And unfortunately, it's a little big for kiddies, but the effect, I think, it's not an eat your broccoli kind of book. It's the Western tradition is where it's at, man. And if I may speak as a 1960s hipster, I think that's what's lost can be recovered. And And there's one way that Pelikans, who I mentioned, really cured me of this, thinking that once a tradition dies, it's dead. And, no, he says, and he points to all sorts of examples. In history in which traditions have died, seemingly died, and recovered, and gone through a process of being recovered. The revival of Hebrew as a spoken language in Israel is one of the really most remarkable things in our times. But he's not thinking of that kind of thing. Gregorian chant had to be painstakingly revived after the depredations of the French Revolution. And there's all kinds of examples of traditions that pass out of usage, but if the vestiges are left there, if those Irish monks are preserving enough manuscripts, it can return. And I think that's what this is all about. To me, what your enterprise here is all about restoring to their former eminence elements of our tradition that have fallen into desuetude, to use a legal term that is not often used, to disuse leading to being invalid. I think that keeping it alive, going to the places, speaking of validity, Eliot has a line about Little Gidding, about going to the places where prayer has been valid. That people have been talking a lot about place here, that there's something about particular places. There's a genius of place. To preserve those places, and preserve those texts, those images. This does a marvelous job of that. And by the way, we're redoing Land of Hope in a similar format. So that will be out in another couple months. So we're going to save the West with these two books.
And on that note, let's join me in thanking Dr. Bill McClay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You have been listening to The Sower, a production of the Ciceronian Society. To learn more about us, our programs, and to sign up for our newsletter, please visit ciceroniansociety.org.